You're listening to Mistreated. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. Did you know that there is a medical term for women who are experiencing low sexual desire or libido? It's called hypoactive sexual desire disorder, or HSDD. According to the National Institutes of Health, HSDD is the most commonly identified sexual problem among women. HSDD is characterized by a deficiency of sexual thoughts, feelings, or receptiveness to sexual stimulation that has been present for at least 6 months, causes personal distress, and is not due to another medical condition. The NIH stressed that HSDD in women has been viewed, quote, inaccurately by some in the medical community as being similar to erectile dysfunction, ED, in men. Hypoactive sexual desire disorder is not female erectile dysfunction. A JAMA study showed that the prevalence of low sexual desire ranged from 26.7% among premenopausal women to 52.4% among naturally menopausal women. The prevalence of HSDD was highest among surgically menopausal women at 12.5%. One of the medications used to treat HSDD is called Addyi. And in December 2025, history was made when the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, approved it for both pre- and postmenopausal women. It became the first medication to treat low sexual desire for women under the age of 65. But did you know that including Viagra, there are already 26 drugs that have been approved by the FDA for male sexual health, but only 2 FDA-approved drugs that target women's sexual health? Addyi was first approved in 2015 to treat HSDD in premenopausal women. Can't help to think about women older than 65. What are their options? In an interview with Time magazine, Cindy Eckert, whose pharmaceutical company developed Addyi, said this: HSDD was characterized in 1977. Medicine has understood it for some time now, but what crept in was social commentary, a societal bias that questions whether pleasure matters for women. In the end, Addyi was approved on the basis of science, with clinical trials involving 13,000 women, which was 3 times the size of the trials conducted on Viagra. Granted, erectile dysfunction is different from HSDD in women, but the FDA took 6 months to approve Viagra, and by contrast, it took us 6 years to earn approval for Addyi. On today's episode, we speak with Aisling Chinyi about the history of how Addyi came to market and how she told that story in her documentary, The Pink Pill, Sex, Drugs, and Who Has Control. But first, let's take a listen to a short clip from the documentary.
When I started, there were 25 FDA-approved drugs for men. When we were going through this, and in our appeal, the 26th drug for men came to market. And it's for curvature of the penis that interferes with your enjoyment of sex. Okay, so that typically had to be corrected surgically, and now there was a different and simpler option. Great. So the studies were on around 1,000 or so men, and it had a pretty important but rare side effect, and that was penile rupture. So let me get this straight. We can give men a product and their dick can explode, but women can't have the 7 dwarfs of side effects like sleepy, dizzy, nausea. 26 times we had done that for men.
With the rights of women being eroded in the United States and around the world, we speak to her about the importance of this film in this moment. Aisling joins me now. Aisling Chinyi, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's really nice to have you here, Aisling. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, so I'm Aisling Chinyi. I'm a director, producer, writer, editor, based for the most part in Montreal.
It's really nice to have you here because you've directed the documentary, The Pink Pill, Sex, Drugs, and Who Has Control. A lot is happening around the world when it comes to the rights of women, especially in the United States where this film takes place. What does a documentary like this mean during a time like this?
Oh, thanks for that question. It's for me, it means that there's so much urgency around these conversations needing to be had, and for voices to really speak up about what's going on, particularly in the U.S. But we see these types of values of taking rights away from women, kind of going back to a time that we all thought we had moved forward from, that like the era that my mom like fought for feels like that's getting rolled back. But right now, with media, with people speaking out about gender equality, about healthcare equality, about equality in general, and having like access to proper, safe healthcare seems more urgent than ever. So it's an interesting time to be releasing a movie like this.
I mean, yeah, because I think within the first few moments of the documentary, Cindy Eckert, who's pretty much the heart of this documentary, she says, quote, "The biggest crisis in women's health is that you're not taken seriously." When you took this on, was there anything that surprised you along the way as you made this film? Like, what's the biggest thing that surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, it's like I come from, like my mother worked for Health Canada for many, many years. I come from a line of doctors in my family on both sides. So medicine has always been something that, you know, we trusted. Our health providers are people that we trusted. My mom worked for Social Health and Health Canada and the Atlantic provinces. And I think the thing that stood out as the most surprising, and then after reflection was like, oh, that actually makes so much sense, is how little do physicians get trained on women's bodies or bodies from marginalized communities. So that's both stark and alarming because, you know, you think when you're going to go into your doctor, go to get your, you know, annual gynecological exam, that they should know how your vulva works and to know about your clitoris, to know about these parts of our bodies that we interact with every day. But actually, like, the medical establishments have never prioritized women's bodies in this type of research for generations.
One of the things that really surprised me was this condition called hypoactive sexual desire disorder. I have never heard of this, and the acronym is HSDD. What is that?
So hypoactive sexual desire disorder is basically when someone has had the desire had sexual desire, had that type of attraction, had that kind of spark that one can feel inside their body to instigate sex, it kind of just disappears. And it disappears not necessarily because they aren't interested in their partner anymore, or, you know, of outside stressful situations or environments. It's something that kind of feels like it's happening internally. And
It's biology.
It's biological, yeah. So it's like they did brain scans on various women who didn't have HSDD and women who did, and they showed them, you know, different pornography and stuff like that. And in the MRIs, like, you could see the difference on how their brain activity was reacting to sexual images. So that's how it's sort of presented in the film, but it's something that's been in the literature since 1977.
And yet we don't really know very much about it.
Yeah.
The pink pill in the doc's title refers to a drug called Addyi. I love that it was named after Addison from Grey's Anatomy. I was like, oh my God, okay, that makes sense. So Addyi is a treatment for this disorder, HSDD. How did this drug come to be?
Well, it was a long and windy road, essentially, for it to get approved by the FDA. It had started off as a antidepressant that was being developed by Boehringer Ingelheim in Germany, and kind of like how Viagra was a blood pressure drug that like had this other effect with blood flow on men. Addyi was developed as an antidepressant, but women were reporting that it was like making them friskier. They were like feeling connected to their bodies more, like having more sex with their partners. And Boehringer Ingelheim had developed it as a treatment for HSDD because it was something that works neurologically. And they first took it to the FDA in 2010. They presented their data, and the FDA rejected it for approval. And then Cindy Eckert, who's in the film, she had come from the men's health space, sexual health space, and she was like, oh man, there's so many options for men to be able to deal with their sexual dysfunction, but there's none for women. Oh, this can really fill that space, because she was hearing from women that, you know, they were frustrated with their sex lives. They wanted something that was like going to give them a little extra zhuzh or, you know, the thing that they used to have, they didn't have anymore. So she thought it was going to be like, oh, it's going to be easy sailing. I've brought drugs to market for men. This one should, you know, here are the roadmap that we usually follow. Boom, it should totally work out. So she went and met with the FDA, and then they give the guidelines of like, here's what you have to prove. Now go out and prove it with scientific evidence. And so she went and did all of that, came back, sent the, applied with the new application. And then when she heard back from the FDA, they had rejected it. They had met all of the milestones that they had put forward. So it was rejected based on like, it doesn't feel like it's super efficacious. It doesn't have a strong efficacy for, what we're trying to do.
It made people dizzy too or something.
Yeah, that it had side effects. Like many drugs come with like, might make you nauseous or dizzy or, have headaches or what have you. And so they're like, those are the same side effects that you'd take if you were taking an antidepressant or you were taking Viagra. But in this case, it was like, we have to protect women from this like very dangerous drug. Because at the end of the day, it's like women, like, why do women need to have better sex? They can have sex without enjoying it. They can have sex without wanting it, which just says a lot about like, the rape culture that we live in.
Well, as a viewer, it's like you mentioned Viagra. So I think a lot of people know about Viagra. They call it the blue pill, and Addyi is the pink pill. Yeah. And early on, the documentary shows the viewer how the creation of a treatment for erectile dysfunction was hailed as a breakthrough. And I think with the FDA, it took only like 6 months for it to be approved. But the pink pill for women was seen as problematic. Like, do we really need it in the first place? Or is it really, is all these other side effects? By the way, the birth control pill has like, But anyway, why do you think that is, that it was seen as problematic, whereas the blue pill was seen as a revolutionary thing?
I think there's a lot of different layers, but like kind of top line, the cultural layer is that we've never been comfortable with women having agency over their own bodies. And we've never really cared if women's experience during the sexual act, like a heterosexual act, is enjoyable or pleasurable for her. Like sex starts and finishes when an erect penis like enters a vagina, ejaculates, and then it's done. Like that's the whole experience of sex, how it's taught to us as children, to medical school. And it's like, well, there's so much more that goes into a sexual act. And it's not just like, if you think about sex as just a reproductive act, and that's the only purpose of it, then people are only gonna have sex like 2 or 3 times, right? But people generally have sex to have a good time. That's most ideally that you're having a good time when you're having sex. So there's just that as sort of the base, like cultural baseline, is that we don't respect women's right to have to enjoy and have pleasurable sex. And then there is the fact that like there is not a lot of research done on our bodies. It's not a purely mechanical, what Addyi does is not a purely mechanical experience. It's actually working on your neurotransmitters, where Viagra works for blood flow. When we think about sexual function as purely like what happens like between the belt and like your knees, then it kind of takes away the fact that there are many other aspects that go into having sex.
Well, I think at one point there's a reporter in the documentary that says that it's great that you have this blue pill for men, but in heterosexual relationships, if the men want to have sex and the women are not having sex, like you kind of have to take care of both people, right?
Yeah.
What role do you think stigma plays in this whole conversation around pleasure for women?
I think it's the kind of the age-old like crux that we always find ourselves in. You don't want to be too sexual because then you're branded as a certain type of like fast woman. You shouldn't have sex until marriage. And when you have sex, you better be a vixen in the bedroom. And it's like all of this like shame and onus is placed on the woman to like carry all of these like cultural expectations that have absolutely nothing to do with her individual experience at all. And so, and because we think of sex as like something that's delivered by another person, like a man makes a woman have pleasurable sex, or a woman gives a man pleasurable sex, because let's face it, like society still only thinks about sex as being between a man and a woman. And so when you think of it, it's like, oh, I'm actually in control of a big part of like how my body reacts and feels pleasure, then that suddenly puts the power back into the woman's like camp. And that's really scary. And HSDD does affect women of all ages. But Addyi hadn't, when they first got approved, it wasn't approved for women, postmenopausal women. Now, this is a drug that works on your brain. It doesn't work on your hormones. So there is no difference between a premenopausal woman and a postmenopausal woman in terms of like neurofunction. But because that's the bright line that we separate between a functioning woman and a dysfunctional woman in terms of like how they exist on this sexual spectrum.
As if people past 65 don't deserve pleasurable
Exactly.
sex.
Well, it's like, I mean,
Or have sex.
men are allowed to. Men can take Viagra until the day they die, you know? But it goes back to, well, why would a woman who's postmenopausal want to have sex? They can't make babies anymore. And now it did this past December, just a couple months ago, it was finally approved by the FDA for postmenopausal women. It was already approved for postmenopausal women in Canada, actually.
Well, that's made history with the FDA, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting too watching the documentary because it shows that not all women are not monolithic, because there were women who were against Addyi, and then you also had a lot of physicians, male physicians, who were for Addyi. Can you tell me who is Dr. Irwin Goldstein?
Yeah, Dr. Goldstein, he is known as kind of the godfather of women's sexual medicine. He was one of the researchers on Viagra, and when they put the paper out on how Viagra works, he started getting all these phone calls to his office because his name was the first name on the authorship of the paper, from the New England Journal of Medicine. And he told us he was getting phone calls, but the phone calls were actually from women being like, well, what do you got? Like, is there a drug for me? Like, sure, great, you give a drug to my husband, but like, what about me? I want something too. And then he was like, go talk to the gynecologist. I deal with men's sexual function. And then the gynecologists were like, we don't deal with sexual function at all. Go talk to that guy, Viagra guy again. So then he decided to like open up his understanding and practice to treat sexual function for everybody, including women, which had never been done before. And he's actually a Canadian. He lives in San Diego and practices there, but he is from Montreal.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Bravo, Canadians.
Yeah.
So how does his story tie into your documentary's other main subject, Cindy Eckhart, who we've mentioned before?
So Dr. Irwin and Cindy knew each other because she was in the men's sexual healthcare space. And then he found out about this drug. This German company was developing this drug, flibanserin. That was the clinical name of Addyi. And he was part of those clinical trials, had patients that had taken flibanserin and were having these like joyous sex lives. And then when it didn't get approved by the FDA, they had to shut down the clinical trials. And the German company was like, well, we're abandoning this drug. And so he went and found Cindy, knowing like her personality, her like understanding of how to get a drug to market, and just being this like, you know, a rare woman in this type of space, in a pharmaceutical space, and was like, go get the drug. And you have to develop it because I have these patients and they absolutely loved this drug, and like, you can go get it from them because they're not going to do anything with it. So she took it on and bought the drug and was like, oh yeah, this should be fine. This will be easy to get across the line. And then it took like another, like she went in that happened in 2010 with Boehringer Ingelheim, and then she took them to task in 2014 to 2015, and it was approved in 2015.
So 5 years.
Yeah.
You mentioned Cindy had already been in that space for male sexual health. And so she assumed that, okay, if we follow the steps that we followed with the male sexual health, it should be fine to go through. But the FDA gave her another set of hurdles to jump over. We touched a little bit on that, but when you were talking to her, did that catch her by surprise?
Yeah, she was shocked. She did talk to me about how when she went in to speak to the FDA is like, okay, here's your roadmap of like what you have to prove in order to bring this drug back put this application back in. And so they had taken it all down, they'd written all the, but it was, when you go in front of the FDA, you're in front of a panel of physicians that are from the field that should be kind of analyzing that drug. And everyone from that panel were all urologists. And she was like, oh, why is it a bunch of urologists that are going to be analyzing this drug that works on the brain function? And they're like, oh, well, we take care of all the sex drugs. And she's like, oh, well, that's because they've all been for men. And then they didn't like her talking back to them. And so she was like, oh, maybe this is going to be like, maybe I'm getting received in a way that's like a little less inviting or welcoming than like I had hoped, but whatever, I'll come back with all the data, and they can't argue if the data is correct. And so she went and did large, long clinical trials with many, many people, came back with an enormous amount of data, and they looked at it and they were like, what Addyi does is that it improves on average the sexual events, or however you want to describe them, as improving by one more event a month. And they were like, oh, that's not very much. Like just one having sex once a month is, who cares about that? Why would you take a drug for that?
But why is it their business if it's just once a month?
Well, that's it. At what point are you like, oh, well, then if they're having it 5 times a day, that's too much. Like, it's like, who gets to judge that? But also, if you're somebody who's not having any sex in their relationship, once a month is actually a lot. Like to go from nothing to like potentially 12 times a year is like actually a huge improvement. And from that, once a month event, it's going to like just spark more everything, like hand touching, like all of the things that like make like kind of that physical connection really grow, But for them, it was like, oh no, I mean, like, so there was like, it was arbitrary. Like, well, what number is an acceptable number then?
There was so much pushback by the FDA that they actually at one point had a black box on it, which is like their strongest advisory. Why was that?
There was a lot of the naysaying was criticism, I should say, was around the side effects. The side effects being you can't drink alcohol on the drug. You might make you dizzy. You shouldn't operate a motor vehicle, so you should take it at night. And like it might make you sleepy. So it's like don't operate a motor vehicle. Take it before you go to sleep. And also, you might be nauseous, which are generally the side effects of like almost all drugs, and you figure that out with caution. And with Viagra or Cialis, it says that you shouldn't drink more than 5 drinks. And I remember like looking up the labels, and it was like no more than 5 drinks, in brackets, 5 glasses of wine or 5 shots of whiskey. And it was just like, so you like
so
literally.
Guys can take 5 glasses of wine, but women cannot take any.
Can't take anything. And it's like, that's a lot of drinking that the men can do, and women can't even have a glass of wine. And it's like, because there's this guise of like protecting women, they can't be trusted, you better just take everything away from them. And they had to sign a form, like if they got it prescribed, they would have to sign a form that said, I'll understand that I cannot drink alcohol. Like, treat it like
paternalistic, right?
Absolutely. Like no man would ever have to sign a form, like a permission slip, to be able to say you understand everything that takes this drug. So it was wrapped up into all of that, and it was given the harshest warning, which obviously is very scary because that puts it in a category of drug that really sounds like it's quite dangerous. And this has happened before. It happened with like estrogen until very recently. That's been debunked, So it seems that when there's drugs that are targeted specifically for female bodies, that there is so much more, you have to prove so much more efficacy, way more than men, and they still could change the goalposts because they can't, because we just inherently as a society don't trust women to be able to report about their own function. And one of the things that was also really striking was one of the reasons they were worried about the sleepiness factor was that they were worried that women were going to wake up the next day and they would fall asleep behind the wheel driving their kids to school. And it's like...
So it's so ridiculous because if I'm a mom and I'm driving my kids to school, if I don't feel well, like it's just again, it makes me think again of the birth control pill because if you've ever taken the birth control pill, the list of warnings are really like extreme, like really, and these things actually happen. On one hand, I understand the care because we know in the past women have been given medication that has harmed them and their babies,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So I understood the caution for care. But watching your documentary and hearing from women in their 30s, women in their 40s, speak in front of the FDA to plead their case of why they need this medication and how it was destroying their relationships.
Yeah.
It challenged so many, like I said before, it challenged my own biases. But again, to what end? If all of the precautions have been taken, why are you making it so difficult
Yeah.
for women who want this medication to have access to this medication for a condition that was identified in 1977?
Yeah. It's
Is it care or is it something about the fact that women, pleasure, and sex should not be in the same sentence?
I think you just hit the nail on the head. It's that we want to be able, it's a system that wants to be able to control women, control how we function in our bodies. And of course, there should be a very high standard from the regulatory bodies. There really should be. But, it has to be, all of these things need to be looked at with an equal lens. And it's like, what are you actually worried about? Are you worried that a woman's gonna get dizzy and, fall asleep behind the wheel? Well, then you have to take off all the antidepressants off the market then, And also, are we not worried that the dads can't drive their kids to school? Like, it's like silly things like that, but it's, Josephine Charente, the lawyer in the film, she has, the pharmaceutical lawyer who has taken a lot of drugs in front of the FDA. It's like, well, drugs are only approved for the person who takes it. You can't approve a drug based on who they might be to other people because you're not a sexual being, you're a mom. And as a mom, you're gonna have to take care of those kids. And it's like, okay. So they paid for a driving study to get done, and actually the women drove better.
It was really hard they drove better after.
Yeah, because they got a good night's sleep.
Amazing. Because I think in the documentary, you also hear from women who HSDD was destroying their relationships. You really humanized it. It wasn't something that was just something that, you just need to hire a nanny and go out, get a babysitter, have, a nice glass of wine to get you in the mood. This was something that was impacting people's relationships.
Yeah.
In what ways was it impacting those relationships?
I think with a lot of the women that we spoke to, like sex and that connection was a big part of the way that they connected with their partner and something they really enjoyed to do. And then when that stopped, whether it was like happened around perimenopause or could have happened before, but it just not being an outlet of connection and enjoyment and pleasure, they really, really missed it. And it was hard to explain, besides just saying, there's something wrong with me, to their partner. So either they would just like grin and bear it and have duty sex, and like that doesn't make anyone feel great. It's not going to make the woman feel great. It's not going to make their partner feel great if they know that their partner's not getting any pleasure out of it. So it does impact like that relationship. And of course there's couples that, they stop having sex and that's very natural and normal and they're totally fine. It doesn't affect their like loving relationship. But for the ones that it did, they felt like a big loss. They were searching for something to be able to bring that thing back into their life. And, almost all of them had tried the talk therapy and the date nights and the glasses of wine and all of that to get to the point where you're bringing it up to your physician and being like, I want to do something about this. Usually those people have tried all the other things.
There was a really heartbreaking story about a family who a woman was divorced by her husband because of this.
Yeah.
It destroyed a family's life.
Yeah. Yeah. And we shot with, that was Barbara and her daughter, Vicky, where you see them in the FDA hearings. And then we we also interviewed Barbara and her husband today. So that was 10 years off. And like, I showed her that footage and, you know, it was really heartbreaking for her. And she's like, the people were so mean to my daughter getting up there and just pouring her heart out when she was also going through this, like struggling with a divorce, but they were just like, oh, well, just get a new husband. And it was like, that's not seeing somebody struggling, you know?
That's not seeing someone's humanity.
Yeah.
What's the reaction been to the documentary?
I think people are really having like an aha moment with it, where it's like one may have biases about like, I don't know if this is something that should be medicated, or, you know, maybe their husband is a jerk and that's, you can't just, you know, medicate that away. And it's like, no, it doesn't do that. But I think what we're actually really having a conversation about is like listening to women, having our physicians being able to react to the issues that we bring up in our bodies, and also that, you know, pleasure, sex, you know, joy should be a basic human right, and we are losing that in the conversation about so many other things. And at the end of the day, it's like, it should be your choice to have a safe option to decide whether you want to take it or not take it if it's something that bothers you. It shouldn't be my choice as somebody who's like, well, I think you're fine. I think you've had enough sex in your life. You know, it's like, I can't tell you that. Only you know that, right? So I think when it's framed as a personal decision, then, and that we should have choice and we should have bodily agency just like men have over basically anything they want to do or have done to their bodies, then it becomes really crystal clear that we shouldn't be taking those things away from women.
And finally, you're Canadian. This topic involves an American federal agency and founder. Why take this project on? Why does it matter to you?
That's a great question. I mean, I am a Canadian. I've never limited myself to stories simply about this country that I love very much. As somebody who comes from immigrant parents, who has interests in many, many different places, for me, it was a discussion about systems, it's a discussion about systemic oppression, it's a discussion about marginalized bodies and how we have those discussions. So I try to blend all of those things into this film, even though it's looking at one specific lens through that we relate it to all the discussions we're having about marginalized bodies. When I watch what's going down in America right now, and speaking with all those doctors that are working in this system that is trying to remove their rights, trying to remove healthcare, trying to remove this from like the educational system, it feels like we can, we're really privileged here to be able to have discussions about what's going on there that they may not be able to have right now because of how things are going. So I think I've been met with a lot of relief from like our American neighbors who are like, thank God Canadians can come in and tell this story in the right way, because there's nothing really at stake for me, like, because I'm able to come in and talk about something that I think is really, really fundamentally important, and that's basic human rights, equality, access to equitable health care,
Well, they always say that when America sneezes, Canada catches a cold. So, but it was a terrific documentary. Congratulations, Aisling. It's been a pleasure having you here.
Thanks so much, Nam. It was great chatting with you.
Thank you so much. This was Mistreated. Thanks for listening. You can follow our show wherever you get your podcasts so that you can get notified each time a new episode is available. We would love to hear your feedback. You can write me an email at mistreatedpodcast@tvo.org or reach out to me on my social channels. This week's episode was produced by Matthew O'Mara and me and edited by Colin Kish. Camera work by Ricardo Diaz, digital shorts by Ariana Longley, and teleprompting by Elisa Verley. Production support from Jonathan Hallowell and TVO's Digital Media Services team. Laurie Few is Executive Producer of Digital. John Ferry is Vice President, Programming and Content. Special thanks to our studio crew here for making the podcast look so great. Thanks so much for listening.